when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him.
He will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him.
And he will separate people, one from another, as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats.
He will put the sheep on the right, the goats on his left.
Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father.
Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world.
For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink.
I was a stranger, and you welcomed me.
I was a stranger.
I was a stranger.
I was a stranger.
Fui extranjero y me invitaron a su hogar.
I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me.
I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me."
And then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you?
Or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you in,
Or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?"
The king will reply, "Truly I tell you,
whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me."
Then he will turn to those on his left and say, "Depart from me, you who are cursed,
into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels.
For I was hungry, and you gave me no food.
I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink.
I was a stranger, you did not invite me in.
I needed clothes. You did not clothe me.
I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me."
And then they also will answer, saying, "Lord,
When did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison?"
He will reply, "Truly, I tell you,
Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me."
And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.
You know, when we first started farming, it was white U.S. migrant families that followed the crops from the mid-Southwest across the country, up the I-5 corridor to the Pacific Northwest and across into the fields of eastern Washington before they'd go home for the winter. But it seemed like overnight they just stopped coming. And in their place, we now had young Latino, mostly men, showing up for work. We had no idea what was going on. Later we found out that at a more macro level, there were some factors colluding to pull U.S.-based families to stay closer to home. For one thing, there were a couple of oil embargoes with Iran going on in the 70s. The price of gasoline went sky high. Families simply started saying, we can't be driving all around the country, putting gas in our car looking for work. About that same time, industries were moving out of the north in the U.S. To the south, and so work became increasingly available where there had not been much industry, where many of these folks lived. Now, at about the same time as those factors were colluding to pull people to stay home, some other factors we discovered were colluding to literally push people off their land in southern Mexico and in Central America. War was happening in Central America, and many factors in the south part of Mexico were coming together in those days to make it impossible for many peasant farmers to stay on their land. Things like diminishing water tables, lack of infrastructure and good roads to take products that they were producing in the south to markets that are still largely today in the north. Or maybe stronger people groups would simply come and kick them off and take over their lands. And so you had this mass exodus of people simply heading north looking for work. We didn't understand any of that when these folks first started showing up, and there was a lot of animosity in the American public about this newest group of immigrants and why they were here and what they were here to do. And we felt like we needed to investigate more for ourselves so that we could understand. Here we were now, we felt like we were employing the enemy. All we were trying to do was to run a business. So we took a trip, which would become one of many we took during the 1980s. But we went to Mexico over Christmas and volunteered with a relief organization. And the experiences we had there really opened our eyes to the realities that these folks were facing. In our minds, the term that made the most sense to us was economic refugees. And there was one experience in particular that has been a guiding light for me over the years. We went to the home of Lupita, and she came out and she said, the baby next door has just died. Here, please feed my daughter for me. Because we were there to volunteer that day with this relief organization. So we went in, my friend and I, and sat down alongside of a young woman who was tied on a box waiting for breakfast. She had no eyes, she couldn't hear, and she couldn't speak. My friend had the rice. I, just wanting to be useful, sat down and I just put my hand on her back. My observations were that she took a couple bites of rice and then she started feeling my face. And then, as I recall, she took another bite or two, and then she just grabbed me and pulled me to her and laid on me. Now that's a simple little so what. But for me, in that moment, a weird thing happened to me. In my mind's eye, I saw a flashing pink neon sign, and it was saying Matthew 25. So I quickly reviewed what I knew of Matthew 25, and all of a sudden it hit me. She was Jesus, and I was the student. Good, affluent me had come down to help poor, brown her, but she ended up showing me what love really means. I gave her a hand on the back. She gave me everything she had to give, her love. So I left that house that day with the understanding that all people have gifts to give. Everyone has been created in God's image with something to give, but we so often ignore the most precious gifts. And so by the time I got home, I was looking at this people group that had showed up to become our new employees, and realizing that all of them had gifts too, but I didn't know a thing about them. And so our trees were growing older, nearing full production by that time. And my husband and I thought, what could we do to show more solidarity towards these people who had left everyone and everything they had ever loved to come to a foreign land just so they could feed their families? What could we do? What more could we do? And so we hit upon an idea. We decided to build a warehouse. For one thing, we hoped for a greater return on investment back to us as growers, rather than send our fruit out as we had been doing to be packed by other packers. So we hoped that we would make more money back to us, and if we built this warehouse, we knew we could hire 100 more people. It'd be 100 more jobs. So we did that, and this time we hired women. We had mostly men working in the field until that time. And when we hired those women, we started hearing stories from them about what was going on in their lives and their families' lives at that time on this side of the border. We heard stories like children being left unattended. There were no aunties, no grandmas. They had left them all behind, nowhere to leave the children. They couldn't afford to put them in private daycare centers in town anyway. Most of them didn't have transportation. They were living in substandard housing. There was a near zero vacancy rate in the nearest town at the time. And so we said, what can we do? Can you imagine just getting to work every day was a job for them, but then while they're at work, expecting them to put out a quality product consistently, while they were wondering if the kids were at home burning down the house, it just, they were under chronic stress. So what could we do to help relieve their stress and hopefully help them become more present to the work we were asking them to do? Became our critical issue. So we decided to build an on-site daycare center. We thought, okay, this will allow mamas to see their children at breaks and lunch and know that they are in a safe place, and hopefully it'll take a little stress off of them so that they can pay more attention to what we're asking them to do. When we built that daycare center, we started noticing other things about their families. You know, when you have children in your care, they're like a door into the family. And we heard a story about a family whose little boy was being bitten by rats. 30 minutes from my doorstep. And you know, you hear those stories about how rats eat 25% of all the grain in India, and we all say, oh, that's so sad, but that's the way it is in India. But here, in the United States, the wealthiest country in the world, 30 minutes from my door, a little boy is being bitten by rats as he tries to sleep at night. It was unacceptable. As Christians, we couldn't live with ourselves. So we talked to a number of agencies to see about collaborating on farm worker housing, and nobody stepped forward. So we took out a $5 million loan, and we built 100 2, 3, and 4 bedroom stucco, high energy efficient houses across the street from our warehouse. And families started moving in. You know, we were just congratulating ourselves on being able to offer these houses for rent at about 60% of market value when the families started saying things to us like, well, they're very nice, thank you, but what we really need is just peace and refuge. They were running away from gangs, drugs, and violence. Nearly a third of our first 100 families that moved in reported prior gang involvement by someone in their family, and they were terrified that they would lose children. And so our work ever since then has been about how to accompany people who have come from traumatic experiences that really can shut them down. They're not thinking about the next year or 5 years or what they'd like to be doing with the rest of their lives. They're thinking about, do I feel safe now, right now, for the next 15 seconds? And so we work hard to make people feel welcome and at home, so that they can begin to discover the gifts that they have to give and begin to help us lead.
So with these former gang involvements, what did you guys do to work on those issues?
Mm-hmm. You know, we've raised 9 children in that community ourselves, and from a purely selfish point of view, you might say, wow, somebody better do something. And, you know, 100 families have just moved in, a lot of them with prior gang involvement, and I'm raising 9 children in the same neighborhood. They're going to the same school. We better do something quick. So we built a gym, we built a chapel, and we quickly hired a couple people to think up activities. We were not social workers, we were farmers. But we realized that these children needed safe, positive activities to be involved in while their parents were working. Most Latino students were dropping out of school, for one thing, during that time. You know, the mothers, if they weren't leaving children unattended alone, they were pulling older kids out of school to babysit. So something like 85% of all Latino students were dropping out before their high school completion. So we quickly put in place some after-school tutoring. That morphed into an all summer long, all day long day camp. That morphed into scholarship programs for all employees and their children. One thing we discovered is that my husband found a way to increase the number of days that there would be work to do in the orchard to nearly year-round. And what we saw was that as a result of that, if a family has full-time work, year-round work, they tend to stay put. They don't choose to migrate for the most part. And when a family stays put, the children stay in school. And when they stay in school, they have a better chance of building pro-social relationships and grasping academic concepts and moving on grade level at the right time with their peers. If they can graduate on time from high school, they have a much better chance of being successful with future plans.
So, schools, how did you work with that issue on the farm? You started an elementary school. When did that happen and why?
Well, the elementary school we actually started as a service to Jubilee Leadership Academy, which we founded in 1995, as a place for high school students who needed a new beginning. This place needed to be a boarding school as well, because it's a residential program. Students come to stay with us for a year minimum, and they need to go to school while they're there. So we started our own boarding school. And at the time, we allowed students from the community at Vista Hermosa, where these homes were located, to attend Jubilee Leadership Academy School. But as that organization grew and attracted more students from around the country with all kinds of critical issues that they needed to be working on, we felt it was not in the best interest of community students to attend those schools with them. So we made another school on site at Jubilee Leadership Academy, and we went on with a school at Vista Hermosa and decided to focus on children in our community. At that time, many Latino students were being put in special ed classes. They were treated as really second-class human beings. Of course, it put a huge burden on schools because, as I said, these folks kind of started showing up all of a sudden, and our school district actually went from about 0 to 100% increase in Latino students. They didn't have bilingual teachers, so it was frustrating all the way around for sure. But we felt, let's try to keep them at home. We're 22 miles away, by the way, from our closest public school, which is another reason families were afraid to venture out too far. They were new to this country. They just were looking for a safe place to live and work. And so we felt, okay, let's give them an opportunity to send their children to elementary school right on the farm, where we hope that we can give them Christian education and all the love and support that we think it takes in order for them to pay attention to their academic studies.
And so you've had a number of kids go through the system now, the elementary school, the high school, and I assume you have some that have gone to college, and how has that been working out?
Yeah, well, I mean, these kids are brilliant like any other kids, given access. There's a term that I learned years ago, and it says Poverty is a lack of access to empowering relationships. I was given a chance to practice. Many of these kids were not. And when they are, they can excel. We have young leaders today, college-educated leaders that grew up on our farm that are serving places like Microsoft, serving in policy institutes in Washington, D.C. They are teachers, they are paramedics. You name it, we've got it. And it is thrilling to see them excel and do what they were born to do.
So we've got all these people here who are working very hard to make a life for themselves, but it seems like we're kind of stuck with immigration policy and that sort of thing. How do you see that?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, the Bible is a book of migrations because human history is a story about human migration. From the beginning, people groups have been leaving one place and traveling to another, looking for safety or water or food or jobs. There are about 3% of the global population that's on the move. And in the United States right now, we have about 13% of our population are here as immigrants who've come here fairly recently. The highest was about 100 years ago when we got to 15% of the population. When you think of things like the Great Potato Famine in the mid-1800s, where 1 million people emigrated, another 1 million people died. It's the same kind of cycle. What we're seeing on the border right now with unaccompanied children as young as 5 years old coming across the border on their own without adults it is a humanitarian crisis, and it's a result of what's happening in their home countries of Central America in this case. That the violence is killing children before they can grow up, and so their parents, in desperation, hope that if they send them out, they might possibly make it to a place where they can live and grow forward.
So as Christians, how are we to respond?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, for me, when I read the Bible, it's pretty clear. We were all strangers once. We were all aliens once, whether in a spiritual way, and we've now been adopted into the family of God, or in a physical way, we came from one place to another and became part of that community or that country. We were all strangers one time. And so the Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, says, welcome the stranger, because it is in them that you see me disguised. So I believe that if we look hard, we will find Jesus in those people.
I like what the message says about in first chapter of John, that the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. Who are our neighbors? And with that, we will finish this discussion with Cheryl. Thank you.
Thanks,
very informative, and we hope to see you again. Thanks.
As an American Christian, is it your job, your duty? Are you called to keep people who are different than you out of the United States? Or are you called to get them into the kingdom of God?
Leviticus 19 is one place that God commands the Israelites over and over again. You were foreigners, you were slaves in Egypt. Therefore, welcome the stranger among you. Welcome the alien in your midst. So we as Christians, if we believe the Bible, if we take God at what He says, if we want to obey His commands, then we need to welcome the stranger.
Hey, brother, do you still believe in one another?
Our immigration laws have not kept up with reality and changes
in our society.
This is an urgent matter. There are people here who live in fear every day, who are just regular, working people, who every time they get in the car, they have to look in their rear view because they're afraid if a policeman pulls them over, they could be deported.
They said, "Mommy, can we go to the library?" I said, "Okay, let's go." But I don't know if I'm gonna back.
It is a constant fear of not knowing if she's all right while she's driving.
Carolina, the little one, she says, "Mom, I have bad dreams and people take me somewhere else." I say, "Why?" "Because you are not here anymore with us."
What if I'm far from home? Oh, brother, will I hear you call? What if I lose it all? Oh, sister, will I help you out?
It's being said that these illegal immigrants take jobs from Americans. For every person that we have holding those just back-breaking, hard, repetitive jobs, there are 2.5 to 3 jobs upstream and downstream, be it suppliers, be it retailers, that will not have a job if we cannot find that labor to do the actual hard work.
I am willing to do anything because I love my kids and I want the best for them. I am trying to do my best. I pay my taxes.
She, of all people, is aware of what she's done and how she's broken U.S. law. And she, of all people, would want to remedy that if there was a way, if there was a path, but there's not right now.
Your vegetables will be picked by foreign hands, either inside our border or outside of our border.
People are tired of waiting. The time is now. My friends who have no other options, their life is going on.
I was asking God, please help me because this is for my kids. This is not only for me, it's for my kids.
We know people who came to this country undocumented. They became Christians here. What would you say to them? I wish you hadn't come here and weren't a Christian?
Please help us to do everything right. And if there is something that we need to do, I mean, I am willing to do anything.
It's not an option to wait, because the situation is only getting worse.